It was a dark and silent night on February 23, 2022, when Tara Pekanika's life changed forever. Living on the west side of Green Bay, she was awakened by a loud noise at her back door between 2:30 and 3 a.m. She got out of bed and went downstairs, noticing the basement light was still on. She heard a car speeding away from the house and assumed it was her son, Shad Thurian, and his female friend, Taylor Shibusness, leaving after spending time in the basement. But when she entered the basement to turn off the light, she was met with a sight that would haunt her forever. At the bottom of the stairs, a large 5-gallon black bucket sat with a striped towel draped over it. Something about it caught her attention, or maybe it was a mother's intuition that something was terribly wrong. As she removed the towel, she gasped in horror. Inside the bucket was her son, 24-year-old Shad Thurian's severed head, covered in blood and staring back at her. In shock, she screamed and ran upstairs to wake her boyfriend, Steve Hendricks, who immediately called 911 in a panic. County Public Safety. How may I help you? I'm the assigned living officer at 829 Stony Brogan. My friend just woke me up and swears she probably just found her son's head in the basement. Who could have done such a thing to her beloved son? And where was Taylor? Had the killers taken her too? The police arrived within minutes, marking the beginning of a chilling investigation that would shock the city of Green Bay. Before we examine the background of Shad Thurian, please drop a like and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Your support means a lot. Shad Thurian was born in 1997 in the town of Green Bay, Wisconsin. He was a kind-hearted and talented young man who had a bright future ahead of him. He worked with his father and grandfather at their family business, learning the value of hard work and dedication. He had a hobby for wood carving and was known as a happy, cheerful person. He enjoyed the simple pleasures of life, camping, playing games, and spending time with his family. He had a casual relationship with his friend, Taylor Shibusness, a girl he had known since middle school. They had a history and a connection, but they never committed to each other. They were both free spirits. They were friends with benefits. Taylor, despite being married to a man who was serving time in jail, found comfort and pleasure in her relationship with Shad. But where was Taylor the night Shad was murdered? When Detective Scanlon arrived at the scene to investigate, Tara, Shad's grieving mother, pointed him toward a 5-gallon bucket in the basement. Lifting the towel that covered it, he was met with an appalling sight. A human head, severed from the neck, blood was everywhere. He immediately took a step back and looked around the crime scene. There was a mattress in the distance. Upon walking close, he noticed bloodstains on the mattress, along with signs of a cleanup on the concrete surface next to and under the bed. Also observed was evidence of blood around a stand-up shower and partially wiped away blood drops on the shower floor. There was evidence of drug use. A glass pipe was found with a bag containing light-colored powder material, later confirmed to be methamphetamine. The crime scene was brutal. Additional details were observed. Body parts were found in the basement in several bags, some in plastic shopping bags and others in a large storage tote. They also found 3 knives, including a worn-down bread knife. Within the tote, they found the torso, which bore signs of numerous cuts where the head used to be. Additional internal organs were in the tote, along with a carving knife. The head in the bucket was visually identified as Shad Thurian. Upon closer examination, Dr. Tranquita, a forensic investigator, noted there was visual evidence of strangulation. Also in the bucket was a male organ along with body fluid and 2 additional knives. Each piece of evidence, each body part, painted a gruesome picture of the crime that had taken place in the basement. Taylor was the last person seen alive with Shad, and she was their main suspect. Was she the one who committed this atrocious crime? Born on November 23, 1997, Tamara and Arturo Coronado, Taylor Denise Coronado, later known as Taylor Shibusness, was a woman marked by tragedy from a young age. At just 11, she lost her mother, a loss that would cast a long shadow over her life. Her only sibling, AJ, died in a motorcycle crash at the age of 22, leaving her alone in a world that seemed to be constantly shifting beneath her feet. Taylor's life took another turn when her father remarried. She and her brother found themselves living in the basement during this time. Taylor worked at a cheese factory. Her father's marriage fell apart when he was accused of a crime involving a minor and was now serving a 12-year sentence for his crime. During this chaos, Taylor found a semblance of stability in her relationship with Warren Sherbusiness. They married on Valentine's Day in 2020. Together, they had a son, Mateo. However, he was taken away by Child Protective Services at birth. Mateo is currently living with Taylor's paternal grandparents in Texas. Taylor's life was far from settled. Her husband, Warren, was convicted of federal drug charges related to meth and was serving his sentence at SCI Oxford, a medium security facility. Taylor herself had her first felony arrest on June 21, 2020, and was charged with several offenses, including evading, eluding, and obstruction of an officer. Was Taylor's tumultuous life what led her down a path so grim that few could have predicted what she was capable of? In the pre-dawn hours of February 23, 2022, the Green Bay Police Department embarked on a critical mission to locate Taylor Sherbusiness. The evidence collected from the crime scene had led them to her, turning the investigation into a race against time. Officer Russell was dispatched to an address on Eastman Avenue, Taylor's last known residence. A van parked outside caught his attention. The dispatcher mentioned she used to frequently drive a van belonging to her roommate. As Officer Russell approached the van for inspection, a figure emerged from the apartment building. It was Taylor. Her clothing bore the disturbing marks of what appeared to be dried blood. Upon spotting the officers, she froze. Officer Russell asked if she knew why they were there, to which she responded, "Because of my warrant for my arrest." She was immediately arrested. Examining the van, Detective Luberta reported he could see a large box on top of a laundry basket of clothes behind the driver's seat. Once a search warrant for the vehicle was issued, they made a grisly discovery. Additional human body parts, including legs, were concealed inside that large box. Investigating her, computer detectives learned she had a disturbing fascination with the infamous serial killer, Jeffrey Dahmer. In the week leading up to Shad Tyrion's murder, Taylor Sherbusiness had conducted searches such as Jeffrey Dahmer walking into court all sexy and Jeffrey Dahmer's, but 11 days prior to the murder, Sherbusiness took a bizarre selfie. The image showed her posing next to a cell phone, which displayed an image of the cannibal serial killer. These findings were crucial pieces of the psychological puzzle that was Taylor's disturbed mind, a puzzle that investigators were just scratching the surface of. As she was escorted to the station, Officer Russell informed Detective Graff, who was assigned to interrogate her, that she appeared to have a significant amount of blood on her clothing. Detective Graff also noted a cut on her left thumb and scratches on her arms and hand. According to Sherbusiness, these injuries were self-inflicted. Additionally, her hands bore red stains that Detective Graff believed to be blood. The evidence at the crime scene and on her clothing linked her to the murder of Shad Thyrion. However, the police still needed to hear her side of the story. Detective Graff advised her of her rights and initiated the conversation. He informed her that officers had found Shad Thyrion's head in a bucket at his mother's house a few hours earlier. Taylor's response was succinct, "That is pretty effed up." Detective Graff asked Taylor if she knew Shad Thyrion, and she said she did. He confirmed the van she drove belonged to her roommate and that she drove the van that morning. He then asked her where the rest of the victim's body was. She stated it was still in the basement. Detective Graff asked her to tell him what happened, and Taylor's first comment was, "That is a good question," because she had blacked out during that time. She said it was just her and Shad in the basement and that nobody else had come down. She said they were smoking meth, which she referring to as, quote, "the bitch," and that soon after this, they were both having sexual intercourse. She said she put a chain around Shad's neck. The strangulation was part of the act. Sherbusiness admitted that she didn't mean to kill Shad, but she was choking him and liked it, so she just kept doing it. She goes into explicit detail how she could feel the victim's heartbeat as she was choking him. Despite this, she continued to pull on the chains. When asked if the victim was fighting back at all, she said, "He did, but he was lying face down and she was on top of him." Detective Graff inquired about the moment she became certain that the victim was no longer alive. Sherbusiness responded that she realized the victim was dying when his face turned purple and blood started to flow from his mouth, and she continued to observe his face, anticipating his death. When asked if she enjoyed it, she said, quote, "Yeah, I liked it, and it took around 3 to 5 minutes for Shad to succumb." Chillingly, she then posed a question to the detective, asking if they understood what it felt like to love something so intensely that you would kill for it. However, once Shad passed away, she didn't stop there. She said she played with the victim's body for up to 3 hours, at one point even cuddling with it. She said, quote, "I was sucking and cutting at the same time. It was very exciting." Shoe Business stated the plan was for her to bring all of the body parts with her, but she got lazy and only ended up putting the leg in the van. Forgot about the head. Detective Graff inquired about the method she used to dismember the body. Shoe Business revealed that she utilized knives from the residence's kitchen, finding the bread knife to be the most effective due to its serrated blade. She mentioned she pulled the body to the edge of the bed and used the black bucket and toe to catch the blood. She would then dump the blood into the shower drain and then stuff the body parts into bags she found around the basement. At no point during her questioning did she seem to show any remorse for her actions or empathy for her victim. In fact, her only regret seemed to be that she forgot to bring the head back home. Taylor Shahbuzines, the woman who had confessed to the brutal murder and dismemberment of Shad Thurian, was now facing the consequences of her actions. She was charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and third-degree sexual assault. She pleaded not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect, a plea that would require her to prove that she was insane at the time of the crime. The trial began on February 14, 2023, a date that ironically marked the 3rd anniversary of Taylor's marriage to Warren Shahbuzines. The trial was presided over by Judge John Walsh, who had witnessed Taylor's attack on her previous lawyer, Jolly. Jolly had requested the trial date to be pushed back so experts could determine Taylor's competency to stand trial, but Taylor had lunged at him in the courtroom, screaming obscenities. Jolly was replaced by Christopher Froelich, who also requested that Walsh recuse himself as his witnessing the attack could affect his ruling. Walsh denied the request, stating that he could remain impartial. The trial proceeded, with the prosecution and the defense presenting their arguments and evidence. The prosecution argued that Taylor had acted with premeditation and intent, pointing to her online searches about Jeffrey Dahmer, her bizarre selfie, and her confession. They also argued that Taylor had enjoyed killing and mutilating Shad, citing her statements to the detectives and the evidence of sexual assault. They presented forensic experts, police officers, and Tara Peckenick as witnesses, painting a gruesome picture of the crime. The defense argued that Taylor was suffering from a mental disorder, possibly schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, that impaired her ability to appreciate the wrongfulness of her actions. They also argued that Taylor had acted under the influence of drugs, namely methamphetamine and trazodone, that altered her perception of reality. They presented psychiatric experts, Taylor's family members, and Taylor herself as witnesses, painting a sympathetic picture of the defendant. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning with their verdict. Taylor was found guilty on all charges, with her insanity plea rejected. She showed no emotion as the verdict was read, while Tara Peckenick sobbed in relief. On September 26, 2023, Taylor was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutor Walsh stated that the public needed protection from her, calling her crime an affront to human decency, dignity, and the community. Chad's father, Michael Thurian, offered forgiveness, saying, "I believe everybody makes bad choices, maybe not to this scale. It does no good to hate you. I know you've got a heart, got a mind." The trial and verdict marked the end of a long and painful journey for the families and friends of Chad and Taylor. While justice was served, there was some semblance of closure for those affected by this horrific and sadistic crime. We remember Chad not just as a victim, but as a person, a son, a friend, an artist. His story is a reminder that behind every headline, every crime, there is a human life that was lived and lost. The peaceful town of Ligan in Northern Ireland was shaken to its core on the morning of December 18, 2022, when the body of 32-year-old Natalie McNally was discovered in her home. She had been brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times, with the killer showing no mercy. To make matters even more horrific, Natalie was 15 weeks pregnant at the time of her death. As the police began their investigation, They quickly determined that the killer had to be someone known to Natalie, as there were no signs of forced entry, and she had willingly opened the door to her attacker. Their focus soon turned to a suspect close to her, her boyfriend, Stephen McCullough, who found her body nearly 24 hours later and was the one to call the police. However, police soon noted that Stephen's behavior was odd. He seemed overly eager to shift blame onto someone else, which naturally drew attention to him. He was immediately brought in for questioning due to his strange actions at the crime scene and the intimate nature of the attack. But just as quickly as he was taken into custody, Stephen was released when he provided an airtight alibi. As a popular YouTuber, Stephen had spent most of the previous evening live streaming to his 35,000 subscribers, making it clear that he had a solid, verifiable alibi for the time of the murder. His stream had lasted over 6 hours, which seemed to overlap with the time of the murder. Despite initial suspicions, the police had no other choice but to let him go, because how could he possibly be responsible for murdering his girlfriend when there was video evidence of him being at home at the time? It wasn't until they uncovered some grainy CCTV footage of the night in question that they decided to take a second look at Stephen. On the video footage, they saw a man enter Ligon, the neighborhood Natalie lived in, around the same time when the murder would have taken place. They also then spotted that same man in the vicinity of Stephen's residence right after the murder, and they knew that the coincidences were starting to stack up. Upon closer inspection of Stephen's live stream on the night of the murder, the police noticed that he wasn't interacting with anyone in the comments or replying to any questions. As they dug deeper, the shocking truth began to emerge. Stephen had pre-recorded the video and then live-streamed it later to create an alibi for himself. But it didn't stop there. They also discovered that Stephen may have left subtle clues in his live stream that hinted at the atrocities he was about to commit. The once innocent live stream now revealed a premonition of the twisted events that were about to unfold. This is the heartbreaking true crime story of Natalie McNally. Natalie McNally was at the pinnacle of her life. Everything was finally falling into place and the future looked bright and full of promise. Her career was soaring to new heights in the marketing department of a massive transport company, with Natalie standing out as a rising star destined for greatness. Her personal life had also recently entered an exciting time. She just discovered that she was pregnant with a little baby boy, who she affectionately planned to name Baby Dean. At the ripe age of 32, Natalie was expecting her first child, and her family shared in her excitement. Not only was Natalie about to become a first-time mother, but she was also breaking new ground in her family as the first one to make her parents grandparents. And as the only girl in the family with 3 fiercely protective brothers, the anticipation and excitement surrounding the arrival of her little one was palpable. From the very start, her family rallied around her, immersing themselves in the process and lending a helping hand where they could. Everywhere they went, they proudly told anyone who would listen about the new addition to the family, and Natalie couldn't help but feel a sense of intrigue as she embarked on this exciting new chapter of her life. The father of her baby was 33-year-old Stephen McCullough. Despite only dating Natalie for a few months before she fell pregnant, he was just as thrilled as she was for the upcoming arrival of their little one. Their unexpected pregnancy may have come as a surprise, but it seemed that Stephen was more than ready for the challenge and eager to step up as a father. Stephen had actually endured a tough few years prior, fraught with heartache and loss. He lost his mom in 2014 and then his dad in 2015, leaving him with only the family dog as a companion. Sadly, the dog also passed away in 2022, leaving Stephen feeling as though he had lost everyone he held dear. But then came the news of the imminent arrival of their little baby boy. The prospect of becoming a father brought new hope and light into Stephen's life as he eagerly embraced the responsibility and joy of impending fatherhood. Stephen and Natalie had made a conscious decision to take things slow and not let their impending parenthood rush their relationship. They agreed to continue living separately but visit each other regularly, not wanting to force anything, and rather allowing their bond to develop naturally. Their arrangement worked well, with the two spending weekends together, alternating between each other's homes. The evening of December 17, 2022 was no different. Natalie stayed over at Stephen's place like she had done many times before. The night started off as any other, with the couple enjoying each other's company and spending some quality time together. The next morning was Sunday, December 18th, and the two were up bright and early as Natalie needed to get back to her home, as she had quite a few things to get through. She needed to get home to feed her pets and then prepare for work the next day before she'd go for lunch at her parents' house and then stay to watch the much-anticipated Football World Cup final between Argentina and France. It was a busy day ahead, but Natalie looked forward to it. She and her family were avid football supporters, and they always made a point of watching the big games together. Steven told Natalie that he wouldn't be able to watch the game with her as he had planned to start his YouTube stream right after the game, and Natalie, being the supportive girlfriend she was, gave him his space and supported his passions. She even texted him after the final to let him know that she was on her way home and that she might go online later to watch a bit of his stream, oblivious to what Steven had actually been planning. On Monday, December 19th at around 10 p.m., police got a frantic call from Stephen McCullough. He had gone to check up on Natalie after he was unable to get hold of her since 6 p.m. the previous day. When he got to Natalie's flat, he stumbled upon the most brutal scene imaginable. Natalie and his unborn baby had both been murdered. She was brutally beaten and stabbed multiple times. A state pathologist would later reveal that Natalie suffered compression of the neck, stab wounds to the neck, and blunt force injuries of the head. She also had a number of defensive wounds indicative of her fight to try and spare her and her unborn baby's life. Police knew that this was the work of a monster, so they immediately secured the scene and got to work trying to figure out who the killer might be. Steven was immediately thrust into the spotlight after he behaved strangely at the scene and gave police the name of a person who he said was responsible. And although they took note of what Steven was saying, their suspicion at the time was firmly towards Steven. He was the one who had found her body, and he was also dating her at the time of the murder. There was no forced entry into Natalie's flat, and it didn't seem that her dogs alerted any of the neighbors about the stranger in the house, which meant that the dogs may have been comfortable with the person. They knew that Steven had some questions to answer, so they arrested him and took him back to the station. While being interviewed, Steven provided an airtight alibi stating that he was live streaming most of the evening and was at home at the time of the murder. Police then went to his YouTube channel, and sure enough, there was Steven streaming away. Police had no other choice but to let him go. Shortly after Steven's release, police arrested another suspect. This person hadn't been named, but it's been speculated that this was the same person that Steven mentioned to the police as the one responsible for the murder. After police interviewed this suspect, however, they found no evidence to charge them with the murder, and they were released on bond while the investigation continued. With no other obvious suspects in the case, police decided to turn their attention to possible CCTV footage. They tirelessly sifted through more than 3,000 hours of footage, their eyes fixed on the screen, searching for any clue that would help solve the case. They meticulously scanned each frame second by second, hoping to catch a glimpse of something that would lead them to the killer. And just when they thought all was lost, a flicker of movement caught their eye at 8:52 p.m. on the very night of the murder. Although the footage was grainy, and to the untrained eye it may have seemed insignificant, police knew that this footage may hold the key to solving the case. In the video, a mysterious figure can be seen entering the neighborhood where Natalie McNally had been staying shortly after 8:50 p.m. He's wearing dark clothing and carrying a backpack. Less than 40 minutes later, he reappears in the footage, but now he's wearing lighter colored clothing. Although the footage was grainy and you couldn't see his face, the police were convinced that it was the same person due to his height and gait. Police believed that the person we see casually walking down this road is actually the murderer leaving the scene of the crime. It's chilling to think that someone could appear so calm and collected after committing such a horrific crime. Police followed the trail of the mysterious man, and according to court records, they uncovered a trove of additional CCTV footage, which have not yet been released to the public. They apparently spotted the very same man on CCTV footage from a bus in the neighborhood of Lisburn, the same area where Steven lived. The route of the bus was identical to the route someone would have taken if they were going to Natalie's home, and the bus schedule confirmed that if this person got off at the station nearest to Natalie's home, he would have passed the CCTV cameras at around 8:50 p.m. So the timelines were definitely matching up. Police also stated that when the man entered the bus, He pulled the hood of his jacket all the way down, and that he had a scarf around his face, making it difficult to identify him. As he tried to pay for his bus ticket, he dropped some coins on the floor, and as he bent down to pick it up, he struggled due to the thick black gloves he was wearing. So at some point, he took off the gloves to pick up the coins, and police said that underneath his gloves he appeared to wear a pair of yellow surgical gloves, similar to the glove prints found at Natalie's crime scene. The coincidences, however, don't stop there. Police also discovered that a taxi driver had picked up a man after 9:30 p.m. in the vicinity of Natalie's place. The taxi was actually reserved for someone else, but the driver told police that a man suddenly got into the back of his cab, begging to be taken to Lisburn because his mom was sick and he needed to get home to her. The driver felt so bad for the guy that he canceled his other trip and drove him to Lisburn. Police said that GPS data obtained from the taxi would confirm that the driver dropped off the man outside the address of Stephen McCullough. And then even more suspiciously, only 3 minutes after the taxi dropped off this man, Stephen's mobile phone was suddenly back on the mobile networks. This, according to police, means that Stephen had deliberately turned off his phone during the time of the murders to avoid being traced via GPS and then powered it back on as soon as he got home. All evidence was starting to point towards Stephen being the murderer, but how was this possible if he was live streaming the entire time? Well, police decided to take a closer look at the live stream, and they immediately noticed that although he appeared to be live, he wasn't interacting with anyone in the comments, and it soon became apparent that he actually pre-recorded the video and played it on his channel to make it appear as though he was live. And the more police looked into the live stream, the more they realized how premeditated the attack seemed to be and how much planning had to go into the murder. It appeared that he created the live stream solely as an alibi, and what's even worse is that Stephen seemed to leave clues throughout the stream, little Easter eggs if you will, about what he was really up to while the stream was in progress. The first thing that catches your eye is that he named the stream the Violent Night Christmas Gaming Stream, and although this may seem a relevant title due to the game he was playing, knowing what we know now makes it all the eerier. If you're watching this video on my TikTok account, I won't go into too much detail about the clues left in the stream due to the nature of TikTok. But for the benefit of my YouTube viewers, I will try to give you as much detail as I can to show you the in-depth planning that Stephen allegedly went through to create this alibi and the chilling clues he left in the stream. The first thing you will immediately notice is how much effort Stephen put in to make the stream appear as if he was live, despite us now knowing that he pre-recorded it all. During the live stream, Stephen keeps checking to see if he's still live and if everything is working as it should. Stephen even has an excuse for why he isn't responding to comments. Judging by the CCTV footage that was released by police, it's safe to assume that Natalie's murder took place sometime between 9 o'clock and 9:30 p.m. And it seems that Stephen had this timeline planned out all along. He started his live stream at 6 p.m. and 3 hours into his stream, which would have been around 9 p.m. Stephen then takes on a side mission on Grand Theft Auto. It's not a mission that he needs to take to advance him in the game, but for some odd reason, he decided to take it on anyway. The name of the mission was the Waste the Wife mission, which involved killing a female character and staging it as an accident. At around 3 hours and 15 minutes into his stream, Stephen decides to take a short break. This would have put the live stream at 9:15 p.m. Normally, when streamers go on a break, they normally flash some sort of graphic to indicate that they're on a break and that they'll be back soon. Well, during Stephen's break, he replaced his graphic with that of a James Bond movie. The title of the movie? No Time to Die. Stephen made up some lame excuse as to why this image was flashed on screen and made a point to tell the viewers that he put it up by mistake. But the fact that his stream was actually pre-recorded makes this mistake even stranger. There was no reason for him to leave this image in the stream because after all, it wasn't live. And what's even more creepy is that if you do an image search on Google for the phrase time to die, this is basically the only result that comes up. So that means that this image was put up at exactly 9:15 p.m., the very time when Natalie was being murdered. There's also a point in the stream where Stephen says abso-fucking-Natalie and then quickly changes it to abso-fucking-Natalie and then gives the camera a kind of creepy look, almost as if he knows something that they don't. Throughout the stream, Stephen repeatedly made comments that seemed to be attempts to solidify his alibi. He emphasized that he had been drinking during the stream, stating that he wasn't planning to drive anywhere and that he would probably pass out immediately afterward. It appeared that Stephen thought he had crafted the perfect plan, believing he wouldn't get caught. However, he was tragically mistaken. On January 31st, 2023, Stephen was arrested and charged with the murder of Natalie McNally. He was denied bail and will remain in custody until his next court appearance on May 19, 2023. As this is an ongoing case, it's likely that more evidence will be revealed as the investigation progresses. Currently, there is no clear motive for the murder, but two possible scenarios have been suggested. One is that Stephen may have pretended to be ready for a child, when in reality he didn't want to have the baby. To escape his responsibilities and the relationship, he allegedly chose to kill both Natalie and their unborn child. The second possible motive involves Natalie's contact with an ex-boyfriend. While it's unclear whether their conversations were romantic or not, police have indicated that these exchanges may have played a role in the motive. Regardless of whether the messages were romantic, it is never a justification for the horrific actions Stephen is accused of. Dawn Bruce was a vibrant 22-year-old woman with a promising future ahead of her. She had dreams of marriage, children, and all the things many of us long for in life. In 1990, while she was peacefully sleeping, she was brutally attacked. The killer left a nearly indistinguishable trail of bloodstains at the crime scene, but thanks to new computer forensic technology, investigators were able to identify distinctive features in the smear that eventually led them directly to the perpetrator. Richmond, Virginia, a city with deep historical roots as the former capital of the Confederacy, has always maintained a strong connection to its past while focusing on the future. With 6 colleges and universities, thousands of young people arrive each year to further their education. Dawn Bruce was one of them. She attended Virginia Commonwealth University, where she studied music and became a member of the Wysaw Wind Symphony Orchestra after being accepted to audition. Her passion for music kept her engaged in her studies, but Dawn was also eager to explore the world beyond university life and discover what she was truly capable of achieving after graduation. To support herself, Dawn worked as a telephone operator during the day and as a waitress at night. Despite the long hours, she embraced the freedom and independence that came with living on her own. A fun-loving and ambitious person, Dawn believed she could accomplish anything, no matter how unconventional it might seem to others. It was well known that Dawn aspired to become a firefighter. She took first and second-class firefighter courses and even volunteered at the local fire station, determined to pursue a career that was both challenging and meaningful. According to her mother, Dawn was just a happy person and wanted to get as much out of life as possible, enjoying every minute of it. At some point, she would have liked to have a family and children, but that was not destined to come true. On December 19, 1990, Dawn's mother, Joanne, went to her daughter's apartment because she had not heard from her in several days. Once inside, she found Dawn in a pool of blood. The medical examiner found evidence that the girl had been abused, sodomized, and stabbed in the heart. According to the investigator, the knife was plunged into Dawn's heart and the attacker held the girl down until she bled out, which experts speculate may have lasted 8 minutes, 10 minutes, or longer. In the process, she was abused. The detective who handled the case said it was one of the most horrific crimes he has ever seen. He added that he doesn't understand how someone could do this to an innocent girl who absolutely did not deserve what happened to her in any sense of the word. Investigators determined that the killer entered the apartment through a window that had been broken open. However, no signs of forced entry were found and nothing was damaged or broken. In addition, there were no foreign fingerprints in the apartment. Thomas Tiller, a forensic investigator, said that when he left the victim's apartment, he did not have good feelings because everything he was able to collect from the scene fit in one large bag and consisted mostly of things on the bed, bedding, pillows, blankets, and so on. Officers then discovered that Dawn Bruce had last been seen at Tommy's restaurant 2 nights earlier, where she was working as a waitress on the night shift. Through her job, Dawn had gotten to know many people, which only increased the number of potential suspects. Investigators Tom Tiller and Jim Dorton interviewed neighbors at the apartment complex, and several neighbors were suspicious from the start. It turned out that the man who lived directly next door to the victim was on parole for burglary and attempted violence against a woman while armed with a knife. Therefore, officers immediately felt he was a suitable suspect. However, with no murder weapon, no witnesses, and few leads, this investigation promised to be difficult. Shortly after the brutal abuse and murder of 22-year-old Don Bruce, John Alderman was assigned to introduce the case. In an interview, he said that when a crime like this happens, which really violates human rights, there's a sense of outrage that you can't get rid of, a sense of outrage that someone is being used and abused in this way. In the meantime, investigators focused their attention on the few pieces of physical evidence they had. The forensic experts found 2 linear imprints on the pillowcase that matched the blade of the knife. The jagged edges were similar to the blades of a hunting knife. Also found on the pillowcase was a partial fingerprint in Don's blood, but the fabric was textured, making fingerprint analysis impossible. Norman Tiller, an expert on latent prints, said the print was virtually invisible even to the experienced eye. The details of the crest were very faint, and he said he had to examine it carefully because when viewed under magnification, the tissue enlarged, causing the crest details to disappear completely. Norman Tiller said that at the time he did not hold out much hope for this print. There were crest details on the print, but in the opinion of many officers at the time, they were not very significant. They knew that if that was all they had and it could not be improved in any way, they would not have enough evidence to solve the case unless they got a lot of other evidence, which they assumed was impossible to get. Traces of seminal fluid were also found at the crime scene. Serologic analysis showed that the killer had type 2 blood. This ruled out Dawn's boyfriend as well as her neighbor, who was on parole for attempted abuse and burglary. However, the girl had another neighbor, Robert Knight, who had previously been arrested for possession of a controlled substance. Investigators were able to determine that woman's car on the street or walking to her apartment from her car. The man was making a sexual remark to her, which is why he became a suspect. He was also able to determine that Robert Knight had type 2 blood type that matched the seminal fluid sample from the crime scene, but he had an alibi for the night of the murder. He said he was with his girlfriend at the time. The fingerprint on the pillowcase did not match the fingerprints in Robert Knight's file. Norman Tiller said that they tried to use conventional photography and different methods to create contrast between the ridges and the fabric, but could not get it to the point where they could have an identifiable print. Attempts to improve the print on the pillowcase using different chemical methods were also unsuccessful. Investigators were no closer to identifying the print on the pillowcase than they were the day after the murder. All the officers knew they had a fingerprint, and it was clearly visible and plainly visible. But no one knew what to do with it because it had been applied in blood to the pillowcase of the pillow, which had a pattern on it, and it was the pattern that made the print unreadable. If there had been a way to make this print readable, it could have taken on the same vivid forensic significance as the great DNA, maybe even more. The investigators then got a chance to take a break. Every year, there is a latent print conference in Richmond that is attended by all the print experts in the state of Virginia. It is essentially a training seminar attended by computerized image processing experts. One of the attendees brought his own imaging system. The officers attending this seminar were very skeptical because they had never seen it used in forensics. But since they had nothing else but a very faint print on the fabric, they decided it was worth a try. The new system was called image enhancement technology. Image enhancement used a computer that identified patterns similar to those woven into the pillowcase. Once a pattern was identified, it subtracted it from the image, leaving only the ridges of fingerprints. After 10 hours of testing, the fabric pattern was subtracted and a partial thumbprint of the killer's thumb appeared on the screen. Investigators knew they needed to identify the fingerprint on the pillowcase to solve Don Bruce's murder. The prime suspect in the case was one of Don's neighbors, Robert Knight, who suffered from an addiction to illegal substances. Knight claimed that he had an alibi and that he was with his girlfriend on the night of the murder. However, his girlfriend said he was not with her throughout the evening. According to Prosecutor Duncan, evidence shows the crime occurred sometime between the 3rd-4th hours of Saturday morning. Robert claimed he was with his girlfriend all night, but she said he was not with her around that time period between the 3rd-4th hour. Robert Knight's fingerprints did not have enough ridge detail to determine if they matched the prints on the pillowcase. Knight then voluntarily turned in a second fingerprint sample, but again, the ridge detail was insufficient for comparison. After that, the suspect completely changed his personality and willingness to help. Every time investigators were near Robert, He became more withdrawn and less cooperative, blamed the officers for the harassment, and no longer wanted them to approach him. Now the charges were in a difficult position. If they couldn't identify the fingerprint as belonging to Knight, the defense attorney could use it against the prosecution at trial. Took a risk and arrested Knight for Dawn's murder, pinning their hopes on new fingerprinting technology and the ability of experts to match Knight's fingerprints. After the suspect's arrest, Norman Tiller had been closely monitoring the technique the police used to take the prints, making sure that each finger was carefully swiped from fingernail to fingernail to get the clearest possible prints. And as soon as Norman saw a suitable print, he would immediately take it back to his office and begin his examination. However, he was slow to jump to conclusions and would conduct repeated tests and examinations over the course of a month. Norman Tiller found what he was looking for. The print on the pillowcase was a left thumb print, and it matched the outside of Robert Knight's left thumb. Norman then did comparative work and analyzed the print from all sides and had another expert check his work. However, another obstacle arose. Image enhancement technology was so new that it had never before been admitted as evidence in a court of law. Everyone was concerned that the evidence might not be accepted as reliable by the should-be admitted. The defense argued that it was a hocus-pocus technology that manipulated and altered the fingerprint image. An expert witness for the prosecution explained that the human eye can distinguish between 16 and 32 shades of gray, while a computer can distinguish 256 shades. She argued that the image enhancement technology did not change the fingerprint data but simply eliminated tissue patterns that made the dark areas of the fingerprint darker and the light areas between the ridges lighter. The expert stated that she could repeat this procedure many times. The judge did not believe that computer enhancements had altered the bloody fingerprint, and this set a legal precedent. However, prosecutors wanted more evidence than just the fingerprint before sending the case to trial. Robert Douglas Knight was charged with the murder of 22-year-old Dawn Bruce, but police still had no murder weapon. A faint fingerprint left on a thin pillowcase was considered strong evidence in court, and prosecutors soon had a lead on the murder weapon. 6 months after the murder, a repairman working in Knight's old apartment discovered something behind the access panel in the man's old bedroom. It's unclear what prompted him to do so, possibly because of plumbing problems. He opened the panel, and when he looked inside, he found a hunting knife in a sheath. At the crime lab, experts brought a simple test to determine if it was the murder weapon using photographic overlays. The knife drawing was compared to the knife prints found on Dawn Bruce's pillowcase, and they matched perfectly. The final piece of evidence was an examination of seminal fluid found at the crime scene, which matched Robert Knight's profile. Prosecutors believe Dawn Bruce returned home from work around 1 a.m. and went straight to bed. Around 4 a.m., Robert Knight approached the front window of her apartment, opened it, and sneaked upstairs. He brutally attacked her, stabbing her in the heart before sexually assaulting her. Afterward, Dawn bled to death, but Knight made crucial mistakes. He wiped the murder weapon on a pillowcase, leaving a distinctive print that was later matched to a knife found in his apartment. Additionally, he left a partial bloody fingerprint on the pillowcase, which was identified using cutting-edge computer technology. Faced with overwhelming physical evidence, and likely to avoid the death penalty, Robert Douglas Knight ultimately pleaded guilty to the crime. He was sentenced to 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Despite the conviction, trial investigator Thomas Tiller expressed disappointment with the sentence. He believed Knight deserved the death penalty. "I believe Robert Knight deserved and should have gotten the death penalty," Tiller stated. "I do not believe he deserves to breathe, eat, sleep, laugh, or feel any emotion. I know he will walk the streets again someday, but it will be very much not soon. Even though justice was served, I believe he deserved the death penalty." On October 17, 2015, a large duffel bag was discovered abandoned along the desolate stretch of Highway 12 in rural Greene County. An elderly man, finding the bag suspicious, called 911. When the responding officer arrived, they attempted to lift the unusually heavy bag but couldn't manage. Deciding to investigate further, they unzipped the bag and uncovered something that would haunt them forever. What they found inside would forever alter the course of an already troubled family's story. At the heart of this tragedy was the Smith-Jones family, a seemingly perfect blended family that had crafted an image of happiness and success. John Smith Oliver, a successful businessman in his late 40s, was born on November 12, 1982, in Jacksonville, Florida. Growing up in a middle-class family, John was raised with strong values and a work ethic that shaped his future. His parents, high school sweethearts, taught him the importance of responsibility and ambition. His childhood was marked by quiet determination, which would help him achieve great things as an adult. John's charisma and leadership abilities led him to success in the business world, where he quickly earned a reputation as a rising star. He married Emily Jones, a beautiful and charming woman in her mid-30s, 6 years ago. Together, they built a tight-knit family, blending their children from previous marriages into one household. John's story with his first wife, Natasha Smith, began over 2 decades ago, in 1990, when they were both young and ambitious, chasing their dreams in the bustling city of New York. The two met at a networking event where John, a rising star in the finance world, was giving a presentation on investment strategies. Natasha, a brilliant marketing executive, was in the audience and was immediately drawn to John's confidence and charisma. Their chemistry was undeniable, and they quickly became a power couple. After the presentation, they struck up a conversation, and John was drawn to Natasha's intelligence, creativity, and beauty. They exchanged numbers, and their first date was a dinner meeting at a trendy restaurant in Manhattan. The chemistry between them was undeniable, and they quickly discovered that they shared a passion for business, art, and travel. As their relationship blossomed, they supported each other's careers and ambitions. John's finance company took off with Natasha's marketing expertise, helping him secure high-profile clients. Meanwhile, Natasha's marketing firm flourished with John's financial guidance, enabling her to expand her business. Together, they built a business empire, with John's company becoming a leading player in the finance industry and Natasha's marketing firm winning numerous awards. They were the golden couple of New York City, admired and respected by their peers. Their personal life was equally successful. They married in a lavish ceremony at a luxurious estate in the Hamptons, surrounded by friends, family, and business associates. They had a beautiful son, Parker, who was the center of their universe. However, as time passed, cracks began to appear in their seemingly perfect relationship. John's long hours and frequent travel took a toll on their marriage, and Natasha felt increasingly lonely and neglected. She threw herself into her work, but the distance between them grew. Despite their efforts to reconcile, the rift between them deepened. They began to argue more frequently, and their conversations became strained. The tension between them was evident, and their friends and family noticed the change. One fateful night, they had a bitter argument at a charity gala in front of their colleagues and friends. The altercation ended with Natasha storming out of the event, leaving John alone and humiliated. The final blow came when John discovered that Natasha was having an affair with a younger man, a talented artist she had met at a gallery opening. The revelation devastated John, and he realized that their marriage was beyond repair. Their divorce was a messy and public affair, with both sides engaging in a bitter custody battle over Parker. In the end, they shared joint custody, but the damage was done. Their once adoring relationship had ended in acrimony and heartbreak. John was left to pick up the pieces, his personal and professional life in shambles. He threw himself into his work, using his business as a distraction from the pain of his failed marriage. But the wound of his divorce never fully healed, and he carried the scars with him for years to come. Not long after their divorce in 2006, Natasha's health began to decline rapidly. She had been hiding a devastating secret. She had been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and it had spread aggressively throughout her body. Despite her brave fight, she succumbed to the disease just a year after their divorce on the 2nd day of March 2007. John was shocked and heartbroken by her passing despite their tumultuous end. He had never stopped loving her, and her death brought up a mix of emotions he thought he had long buried. He attended her funeral, where he saw the impact of her passing on their son, Parker, who was struggling to cope with the loss of his mother. In 2008, as John navigated his grief, he met Emily Jones, a kind and gentle soul who was a friend of a friend. She was a widow herself, having lost her husband to a tragic accident just a few years prior. They bonded over their shared experiences of loss and heartache, and John found himself drawn to her warmth and compassion. Despite his initial reservations about remarrying, John found himself falling deeply in love with Emily. She brought light and joy back into his life, and he was grateful for her presence. They married in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family in 2009. John's son, Parker, 22, was a charismatic and outgoing young man who had always been close to his father. Emily's daughter, Avery, 25, was a stunning and vivacious young woman who had quickly become the center of attention in the family. To outsiders, the Smith-Jones family appeared to be a loving and supportive unit. On October 18, 2015, everything changed for the Smith-Jones family on that fateful morning when Avery's lifeless body was discovered strapped inside a large duffel bag, discarded along the desolate stretch of Highway 12 in rural Greene County. The gruesome discovery sent shock waves through the small community, and the family's perfect facade began to crumble. As investigators processed the crime scene, they found that Avery's body had been brutally mutilated with evidence of severe trauma and struggle. The once agile young woman who had been full of life and promise had met a horrific end. The news of Avery's murder sent her family into grief and confusion. Avery had left home 2 days ago, dropping a text that she was going to be with her boyfriend Adrian and be back the following week. When the gruesome discovery of Avery's body was made, Detective Matthews was immediately put in charge of the case. On October 19th, the police began questioning the Smiths in their home. The first person that was interviewed was Parker. The police listened intently as Parker shared his honest thoughts about his relationship with Avery. When he was asked if he had a close relationship with his stepsister, Parker explained that he had never felt close to his stepsister, and it wasn't because of anything Avery had done. Rather, it was because he had struggled to accept his father's decision to remarry after his mother's passing. He had felt loyal to his mother's memory and presented the idea of another woman taking her place. The police interviewed John, who was alone with Parker at home since Emily was away on a business trip. John stated that Avery was private and didn't confide in anyone, including her mother. However, he later revealed that Avery was close with his son Parker, contradicting Parker's earlier statement. John described their relationship as sibling-like, with a deep affection for each other. He noted that Parker seemed to know more about Avery's life than anyone else in the family. When asked about his whereabouts on the day Avery left home, John provided an alibi, stating he was at work from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. He mentioned a meeting with colleagues around lunchtime, which could confirm his alibi. The police investigated and found inconsistencies between John's and Parker's statements, including their differing accounts of Avery and Parker's relationship. The police were able to confirm John's alibi through his colleagues, but the discrepancies in the family members' statements raised further questions. On October 21, 2015, the forensics performed an autopsy on the dismembered body of Avery, and when they were done, they provided the report of their findings to the police. They found out that she was suffocated to death before she was dismembered. Based on the cuts on the body, the murder weapon was suspected to be a big knife, a butcher knife probably. They went through the files of the deceased. There was no important clue that could lead them to the killer, and they summoned the Smiths to provide their statements at the station. On 22nd, they were summoned. John was questioned about when he last saw or heard from Avery before she left. John thought for a moment and answered that he remembered coming home early on 16th to pick up something he forgot around 2 or 3 p.m. He had thought he heard Avery's voice coming from Parker's room. He continued that he had knocked on the door, but there was no response. The door was locked, and when he knocked and got no response, he believed everyone was out, so he didn't think much of it. The police jotted down his statement as he spoke. Then John showed them the text he got from her that she was going to visit Adrian. They asked who he was, and John said that he was Avery's boyfriend. He added that he found it strange because she had never texted him about such matters and her outings with him before. The police got a new lead and immediately found out his address, which was gotten from Parker after he was questioned. Adrian Gareth was apprehended and questioned. They asked him why he murdered Avery, and he denied, seeing her not to talk of murdering someone he used to cherish. He added that the last time he saw her was 2 months prior, and that was because they broke up. They checked his activities a week before the murder, and they checked the alibi he provided on his activities on 16th that the victim left home. They confirmed it and he was let free. Now the cops were back to the beginning. There was no lead. They tracked the deceased phone, her number provided by her stepfather, but they came to a dead end also because they found it in a pile of trash not far from where the body had been found. They went over the case file again, confirming the statements they have gotten, and the focus fell on John's son Parker. He had said he was not close to the victim, but he seemed to know more about her than her stepfather and even knew the details of her boyfriend. The next day, on October 23rd, 2 police officers visited the Smith-Jones residence. This time around, Parker was summoned to the living room where he was questioned about his whereabouts on the day the deceased left home. Parker claimed he was at a friend's place on that day. They pressed for more details, asking Parker what he was doing between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. that day. They noticed that he hesitated before answering. He responded that he had been home sleeping. The police suspected that he was lying. They checked the book, which had the written statement of his father that he had knocked on Parker's door, and nobody had responded. They began to probe further. Parker answered the questions they asked. The police decided to thoroughly investigate Parker's alibi by contacting the individuals he had provided as references. However, when they reached out to these contacts, they were met with a surprising revelation. None of them could confirm Parker's presence on the day in question. In fact, all of them denied ever seeing Parker on that day, contradicting his earlier statement. This new information raised suspicions, and the police decided to take their investigation a step further. They requested access to the CCTV footage from cameras in the vicinity of the Smiths' residence, hoping to gather more evidence. After obtaining the footage, they carefully reviewed it and made a significant discovery. The CCTV footage revealed that Parker had driven his father's car out of the compound around 7 p.m. on October 16th, a crucial detail that contradicted his earlier statement. This new evidence suggested that Parker may have been involved in Avery's disappearance, and the police began to investigate him further. The fact that he had used his father's car and had been seen leaving the compound around the time Avery went missing raised serious questions about his involvement. The police were determined to get to the bottom of the mystery and uncover the truth behind Avery's disappearance. Immediately, they requested a warrant to search the home of Smith-Jones, and on the October 24th, a search was made. Parker's room was searched, and what they saw surprised them. There were several duffel bags of the same color as the one Avery was found in. They searched his dresser drawer. They found a pair of gloves and a butchering knife. There was bloodstain on the knife. It was no doubt the same one he had used in the dismemberment of the deceased. On the October 24th, they found enough evidence to arrest Parker, who had been watching the whole time. He claimed that he was innocent, but the police dragged him to their van where he was taken to the district to be investigated. The forensics team found bloodstains in his room, and the pillow he had used to suffocate the girl had her DNA. There were some other things found in the room that pointed out that the 2 step-siblings were close and intimate. When the police brought all the evidence they had before Parker, he couldn't deny it anymore, and he broke down in tears and he confessed to his crime. He hadn't intentionally killed Avery, no matter what the cops might think. In truth, he had grown to care for her deeply. Their affair had started innocently enough with a moment of comfort that had turned into something more. He said that the first time they had undressed each other, Avery had been crying, her body shaking with sobs, after a fierce argument with her boyfriend over the phone. He had been the only one around, and he had gone to comfort her. They had ended up on the same bed, and somehow their mutual attraction had taken over. He continued that Avery had been vulnerable, and he had been drawn to her fragility. He had held her close, feeling her warm tears on his skin, and before he knew it, they were kissing. It was a gentle, tender moment, but it had sparked something deeper within them. He continued that, as they had undressed each other, he had felt a sense of excitement mixed with guilt. They were step-siblings after all, and their parents would never approve. but they couldn't help themselves. They had been drawn to each other like magnets, their bodies craving each other's touch. That first time had been awkward yet passionate. They had explored each other's bodies, discovering new pleasures and desires. Parker had felt alive, like he had finally found someone who understood him. From that moment on, they had been inseparable. They would steal glances at each other during family gatherings, their hands touching under the table. They would sneak around, finding moments to be alone, to kiss, to make love. Parker had never felt that way about anyone before. He had lied to the police, but it was only to protect their secret. He hadn't meant to hurt Avery, and he certainly hadn't meant to kill her. He mentioned the events of that fateful day. Avery had come to his room, eager to rekindle their affair, and he had been hesitant at first, but she had been persuasive. As they began to undress, he had felt a mix of excitement and fear, knowing that they could be discovered at any moment. And then the knock on the door had come, sending his heart racing. He had panicked, fearing that his father or stepmother had discovered them. In a split second, he had made a decision that would haunt him forever. He had placed the pillow over Avery's face, trying to muffle her voice, which was beginning to rise in panic. He had thought it would calm her down, but in reality it had done the opposite. Avery had struggled beneath him, her body tensing up in fear, but Parker had been too caught up in his own panic to notice. He had been frozen, his mind racing with thoughts of being discovered, and he hadn't realized that Avery had stopped moving. It wasn't until he had lifted the pillow, thinking that the coast was clear, that he had seen her lifeless eyes staring back at him. He had been in shock, unable to comprehend what had happened. He had tried to revive her, but it was too late. Avery was gone. He had then tried to fit her into one of his duffel bags in the room, but her body didn't fit in. He was trembling and did the unthinkable. He took the butchering knife in the kitchen and separated her body parts and fit them perfectly in his bag. He then drove off in his dad's other car and dumped the bag in a desolate stretch of Highway 12. After the confession, the police realized that Parker's affair had gone from a moment of pleasure to destruction. The police allowed Mr. John to see his son behind the bars while they held Mrs. Emily, who they had called to inform her on her trip the previous day about the death of her daughter. They held her from holding her husband and badgering him with her heels. She had collapsed. After seeing the horrid body of her daughter, she had seen healthy before she left for her journey. It was a commotion, and John had told the police that he would bring his lawyers to free his son, claiming his son was innocent and he had been coerced to admit the crime. The news about the Smith-Jones spread around like wildfire, and several articles were written to condemn the act of the boy. Some articles wrote that the boy did it unintentionally and must face a minor punishment, but the articles were bombarded and forced to be taken down since it was a very sensitive topic. Several people followed the story to know what would happen to Parker. On November 1st, Parker was in court for his crimes. He was found guilty and got a life sentence. Parker's dad, John, was visibly upset and shouted at the judge, unable to come to terms with the sentence. He felt it was unjust, given the circumstances, but the security guards quickly intervened and escorted him out of the courtroom. Meanwhile, Emily, Avery's mother, sat in the courtroom, grief-stricken and overwhelmed with emotion. She wept uncontrollably, still mourning the loss of her daughter and struggling to process the pain caused by the tragedy. The courtroom was filled with tension, everyone caught in a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, sorrow. The question at the heart of the case was whether Parker should face the full extent of the law for his reckless actions, even though he hadn't intentionally murdered his stepsister. Some believed his actions, though not premeditated, were so reckless that they warranted severe punishment. Others felt a lesser sentence was more appropriate, given that he had not planned Avery's death. As the court proceedings continued, another complex issue loomed. Could John, who had supported his son through everything, continue living with Emily, knowing that his son had caused irreparable harm to her family? Would their relationship ever be the same again? The aftermath of Parker's actions had left deep scars, and the path forward for both families seemed uncertain. Marek Hecko, a Slovakian citizen who moved to the United Kingdom in 2019, had initially been hopeful about his fresh start in Chelmsford, a city about 30 miles northeast of London. At just 23 years old, Marek was determined to build a new life, taking up work as both a waiter and a chef at 2 local restaurants, working long hours to secure a better future for himself. By 2021, it seemed like Marek had made significant progress, securing stable employment and integrating into his new life. In October 2021, his personal life took a positive turn when he began a relationship with Stephanie Bream, a local barmaid in Chelmsford. Marek was smitten with Stephanie from the start, eager to spend as much time with her as possible. Initially, the relationship seemed to be going well, but cracks soon began to show. As their relationship developed, Stephanie began to notice troubling signs in Marek's behavior. She grew suspicious of his actions, particularly concerning his possible drug use. Despite his repeated denials, Stephanie's intuition told her something wasn't right. His behavior, including his erratic actions and mood swings, was a clear indicator to her that he might be struggling with substance abuse. By May 2022, Stephanie had had enough. She ended the relationship, citing the breakdown of trust as the main reason. She explained that their relationship had become unhealthy and that she could no longer see a future with Marek. Though the breakup was initially amicable, Marek had difficulty letting go. His emotional attachment to Stephanie seemed to turn obsessive as he bombarded her with long, emotional text messages pleading for her to take him back. His behavior became more erratic, with his messages escalating in intensity as he desperately tried to salvage their relationship. It was clear that Marek struggled with the loss of the relationship, and despite his outward persona of a hardworking individual trying to build a life in the UK, deep-seated issues, both personal and emotional, seemed to be brewing beneath the surface. This emotional turmoil would eventually set the stage for an unimaginable tragedy that would shake the community to its core. He would pitch up to her work and home uninvited, demanding she speak to him and hear him out. Marek even told her that he had been diagnosed with colon cancer, a lie to garner sympathy in an attempt to win her back. None of his attempts were successful, however, as by then, all trust had already broken down and Stephanie didn't believe a word he said. His messages were incessant, his pleas were unyielding, and his presence was unwelcome. Yet none of this seemed to slow Marek down. He would obsessively stalk her Facebook profile, looking at every post she interacted with, trying to figure out if she was in another relationship. He would stalk the profiles of people whose photos she liked, on whose statuses she commented, and even people she recently befriended. He was convinced that she was seeing someone else, and he was convinced that this was the reason she didn't want to be with him. Marek was actually not too far from the truth. Although the reason that she didn't want to see him anymore had nothing to do with another love interest, the fact of the matter was that Stephanie had recently begun dating someone else. A short while after ending her relationship with Marek Hiko, Stephanie Bream started seeing Adrian Ellingford. He was a 44-year-old resident of Chelmsford and was described as a hardworking good man who was always willing to help out friends and neighbors whenever they were in a pickle. He was also a father to 2 boys aged 10-12, and Adrian would regularly volunteer at the local Boy Scout group. And although Adrian seemed to be a good father and a good friend to many, he also had his weaknesses. Although he was seeing Stephanie Bream at the time, he actually had a wife at home who he had been married to for 17 years, and the relationship he had with Stephanie was an extramarital affair. It seems that the affair didn't bother either Stephanie or Adrian too much, and they continued seeing each other whenever they could. One afternoon, while Stephanie was waiting for Adrian to come over to her place, Marek actually came to knock on her door. He told her that he was there to pick up a few of the things that he left behind while they were dating. Despite Stephanie acting quickly and giving him his belongings, Marek refused to leave, instead staying outside on the porch for another 40 minutes begging Stephanie to give him another chance. While he was standing on the front porch, declaring his undying love to Stephanie, Adrian pulled up in his car for his scheduled visit with Stephanie. He passed Marek on the way into the house, and although he didn't acknowledge him or speak to him, he did catch Marek's attention. Marek wanted to know who this man was that just entered the house, but Stephanie wasn't responding to any of his questions. Because Stephanie was still living at home with her mother at the time, Merrick wasn't certain if Adrian was there to visit her or if he was a friend of her mom's, so he didn't push the matter too far, instead reverting back to asking Stephanie to give him another chance. When she continued to ignore him and refused to give him attention, Merrick eventually got tired and left Stephanie's home. No doubt still curious about who the man was that had just come to visit the Bream household. On July 24, 2022, only 2 months after breaking up with Merrick Hiko, Adrian Ellingford was out with Stephanie Bream and her mother. It's believed that they went to a local pub for drinks before returning to Stephanie's home a bit later in the evening. When they got home, the three of them continued to socialize in the garden before eventually calling it a night at around 1 a.m. Adrian and Stephanie retreated to her bedroom on the first floor of the house, while her mom also went to her bedroom on the ground floor. Cell phone records reflect that Stephanie last checked her phone at 2:43 a.m., meaning that she most likely fell asleep shortly before 3. About an hour and a half later, Stephanie was suddenly awakened from a deep sleep. Adrian was in the process of getting out of bed, telling her that he thinks someone had just been in the room. Still groggy and disoriented, she asked him what he meant, and as he was making his way around to the foot of the bed towards her, he once again told her that someone had been in the house, and then the very next moment, he collapsed on the floor. When Stephanie examined what was going on, she noticed that Adrian had blood on him, and she immediately called her mom for help. As her mom came upstairs to try and assist, Stephanie was already on the call with 999, trying to explain the odd situation. During the harrowing 11-minute call, Stephanie's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of the ghastly puzzle before her. With each passing moment, the grim truth unraveled. Adrian had been viciously attacked, stabbed not once but twice. The second blow delivered with such savage force that the blade shattered, becoming lodged within his wounded back. Emergency services arrived a short while later, and sadly, Adrian Ellingford was declared dead on the scene. Police got to work immediately, cordoning off the crime scene and trying to collect as much evidence as possible. They noted that there'd been no sign of forced entry, although Stephanie always slept with the sliding door open due to the heat of the July summer sun. The front door was also left open, which indicated to police that the intruder must have entered through the open sliding door and then left through the front door of the house. At the bottom of the stairs, they found the handle of the knife, and on the side of the house, they found an empty wine bottle. Police worked tirelessly to find as much evidence as possible, and as the hours passed and darkness turned to daylight, they received an unexpected breakthrough in the case. At around 7:30 a.m. on the morning of the murder, they were approached by a visibly inebriated man with a bottle of brandy in hand, and what he told them would immediately raise their suspicions. Merrick Hecho was arrested shortly after 7:40 a.m. on the morning of July 25, 2022. He was initially arrested on suspicion of being drunk and disorderly, but by 4:45 that afternoon, police had arrested him on suspicion of murdering Adrian Ellingford, and he was immediately their prime suspect. Merrick Hiko went on trial in February 2023, and during the 3-week trial, the state put forward their case. They said that Merrick was obsessed with Stephanie and couldn't get over their breakup. He would stalk her regularly and refused to move on, and after realizing that she was in another relationship, he couldn't accept it and decided to act out. Prosecutors said that on the morning of July 25th, CCTV cameras captured Merrick purchasing 2 bottles of wine from a garage on Rainsford Road in Chelmsford at 3:47 a.m., walking towards the direction of Nelson Grove where Stephanie had been staying. At 4:45 a.m. right after the incident, he was captured again walking in the opposite direction of Stephanie's home, and this time he was carrying only 1 bottle of wine. Prosecutors said that they believed that Merrick went to Stephanie's home and drank 1 bottle of wine on the side of her house and then left the bottle there. His DNA was later found on the bottle. The court heard that after drinking the bottle of wine, Hiko entered the house through the open sliding door, and that's when he saw Ellingford in bed with Stephanie. He stabbed him twice in the back before leaving through the front door of the house, dropping the handle of the knife at the bottom of the stairs. His DNA was also found on the knife handle. Merrick Hiko denied any involvement in the murder and explained that the bottle of wine and knife only had his DNA on it because he had been at the house many times before and that it was probably cross-contaminated. He also said that the reason he returned to the scene offering to help was that he heard about the incident on the news that morning, and he wanted to get to Stephanie to console her. The prosecution was quick to point out, however, that by the time Hacko arrived on the scene, no information had been released to the public and that nothing had been reported on the news. On March 14, 2023, after less than a day of deliberations, the jury at Chelmsford Crown Court convicted Merrick Hicko of the murder of Adrian Ellingford. He was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years before he could be considered for parole. Following the conviction, Adrian's wife paid a heart-wrenching tribute to her late husband. She said, "Adrian was my amazing husband of 17 years. As well as being my husband, he was a loving son, a caring brother, a friend to many, and most importantly, a truly brilliant father to our boys. They will not have Adrian with them through the milestones in their lives. He will never be able to teach them to drive, buy them their first drink, or celebrate their academic achievements. He will never see them grow up into young men who will have partners and families of their own. No one will ever be able to replace their dad." She continued, "Adrian, you will always be missed by us as your family, and you will always hold a special place in our hearts. We miss you every day and love you forever." Beatrice was born on June 7, 1997, in Elvas, a small town near Spain's border. From a young age, she developed a strong passion for music, literature, and helping others. As the beloved only child of Paula and Carlos Liber, she excelled as a pianist and was an avid reader with a particular interest in psychology and human behavior. Beatrice dreamed of becoming a psychologist. To pursue this dream, she moved over 100 miles to Lisbon and began studying psychology at the University Institute of Lisbon. She stayed in her uncle's apartment in Chilas, alongside her cousin. After completing her 3-year bachelor's degree, she chose to continue her studies with a master's in social and organizational psychology. To support herself financially, Beatrice worked part-time at a Disney store. Naturally sociable, she easily made friends. Beatrice was well known among her teachers, classmates, and even the customers at her workplace. On Friday, May 22nd, she unexpectedly missed a group presentation in class, which shocked everyone, as she was known for her commitment and never missing classes. What made this even more perplexing was that she did not reach out to explain her absence. The following day, Beatrice's mother, Paula Laber, received a call from Ruben Kudo, a friend of her daughter. He expressed his concern about not being able to contact Beatrice. Immediately after ending the call with Ruben, Paula tried to reach her daughter, but her calls went unanswered. Carlos, Beatrice's father, joined Paula in Lisbon. Together, they managed to get the keys to Beatrice's apartment. Beatrice had been sharing the apartment with her cousin. However, due to the COVID pandemic, her cousin was in isolation back home, leaving her living alone. Upon reaching Beatrice's apartment, her parents were pleasantly surprised to find Ruben Kudo already there, waiting for them at the entrance. They entered the apartment together and noticed that the main light was on, and there were plates on the dining table, giving the impression that Beatrice would return soon. However, they found her wallet and cell phone on the table, items she would never leave behind unless in a rush. This alarmed them. Paula speculated that Beatrice must have left in haste to leave these essential items behind. But the question remained, where could she be? Everything else in the apartment seemed clean and in order, with no signs of foul play. So initially her parents agreed that she indeed must have left of her own volition and will return soon. However, despite what she revealed on the surface, Paula's intuition was telling her something was terribly wrong. They immediately rushed to the PSP, or Portugal's Public Security Police, and filed a missing persons report. As is the case in many countries, individuals are typically required to wait 24 hours before filing such a report unless there is evidence or a strong suspicion of a crime. Beatrice's apartment, however, showed no signs of forced entry or any signs of a struggle. May 24th. 24 hours have passed with no word or sign of Beatrice. Her anxious parents have barely slept and grew increasingly worried by the hour. Throughout this time, they were supported by her friend, Ruben Kudo. Seeing the parents in such distress, Ruben opened a WhatsApp group to kick off the search for Beatrice, inviting everyone he could find who possibly knew her. From her family, friends, or acquaintances, he organized search parties and shared updates periodically with everyone. As the days went by, and there was no sign of Beatrice, her parents feared she was lost, kidnapped, or worse. Paula wondered, would a ransom note turn up? Any update at this point would be a relief. This case started to gain traction on national news with reporters and journalists talking about Beatrice everywhere. Her parents were hopeful this would raise awareness, and someone, somewhere would come forward with an update on her whereabouts. During all this, the police were conducting their own investigation. They soon announced they had their prime suspect on hand. What absolutely shocked everyone was the suspect was none other than Beatrice's friend, Ruben Kudo. Paula initially thought this was nonsense. The one man who was helping more than any other, rallying people, leading search parties, and updating everyone via WhatsApp was now being harassed by the police. How infuriating. Paula felt bad for this man. She knew that Beatrice had known Ruben since the beginning of her master's degree, and he seemed more concerned and desperate to find her than anyone else. What could possibly be the mix-up that led police to arrest Ruben? It turns out that as police were investigating Beatrice's disappearance and questioning people that knew her, they learned from her friends that Ruben was very fond of her, more like obsessed with her. He was constantly seeking her company and wanted her to spend time with him and only him. Also, from gaining access to messages on her phone, it seemed Beatrice and Ruben were more than just friends, and this was enough for them to obtain a search warrant to his apartment. There they found damning evidence to confront him with, but more on that later. Ruben Kudo himself was a well-liked 24-year-old man described by many as friendly, intelligent, and at times, flirtatious. Like Beatrice, he had a strong interest in literature and music, and was also studying for his master's degree in social psychology. He wrote fondly of his humanitarian volunteer work in Mozambique, and had even published articles in local newspapers. What Paula and Carlos didn't know was that the police had good reason to suspect him. When they brought Ruben Kudo to the interrogation room, they spoke to him for hours, slowly showing him the proof they had gathered to gauge his reaction and obtain a confession. They showed him Beatrice's mobile phone, which revealed that they had been in contact for the past few days and that he was the last person to see her alive. They also showed him the blood traces they found in Beatrice's apartment, traces that were undetectable to the naked eye, but were visible under ultraviolet light. Beatrice's neighbor had also mentioned sightings of blood droplets at the public area in the apartment complex, but at the time she didn't think much of it and just wiped it off. Ruben denied all involvement, claiming he was just a friend of Beatrice and was extremely worried about her. The investigators were wasting their time when they could be out there, like him, leading search parties and trying to locate her. When pushed for his whereabouts that night, he said that he did indeed spend time with her, but they parted ways that night on good terms. He said he was now worried about her and had no motive or reason to harm her as he cared for her deeply. However, when investigators presented the blood they found in his father's car back in his apartment, and that the DNA matched Beatrice's, a different Ruben emerged. Now facing irrefutable proof, and surprisingly confronted in a way he couldn't imagine, he confessed. May 21st, 2020. Ruben picked up Beatrice from her apartment in Lisbon, and they drove to his parents' house about 15 miles away. His parents were away, and they had the house to themselves. They spent the night there, and the next day, they returned to Lisbon around 1 o'clock p.m. That evening, Beatrice had plans to meet up with some friends, who were also her classmates. They had a group project to present the next day, and they wanted to go over the details and have some fun. Beatrice told Ruben that she could not see him that night, and that she was going back home to Elvis the following day to visit her parents and her boyfriend. Ruben was not happy with this. He wanted to spend more time with Beatrice and did not like the idea of her being with other people, especially her boyfriend. He tried to persuade her to change her plans, but she refused. She put her foot down and told him that they were just friends, and that he had to accept that. Perhaps it was this that triggered him. A rejection for another man that he couldn't accept. Because what he did next was, in one word, repulsive. Ruben said he felt rejected and angry. He decided to take matters into his own hands. He picked up an iron baton from home and drove to Beatrice's apartment. He had to pass by a toll bridge where he purposely paid in cash to avoid being traced. He knew that Beatrice was going to be alone because she had told him her cousin was back home. Ruben had also switched his phone to flight mode as an extra precaution. Upon his arrival, he exited his vehicle, concealing the baton from sight. He then rang the doorbell. Beatrice, surprised by his unanticipated visit, welcomed him inside. This account aligns with the police report, which noted no evidence of forced entry. The moment the door closed behind them, Ruben launched a vicious attack on Beatrice with his baton. He struck her multiple times. She did her best to fight back and covered her face and head with her arms, but Ruben overpowered her. He struck her hard in the head 5 times. It was so violent that Beatrice died on the spot. Once Ruben calmed down and came to grips with what he had just done, he panicked and decided he needed to find a way to cover this up and dispose of her body. He spent the next 5 hours in her apartment, meticulously cleaning up the blood and evidence. He also sent a message from Beatrice's phone to one of her friends, claiming that she was too tired to meet up with them. He waited until late at night and, using the cover of darkness, carried Beatrice's body on his back all the way to his car. He drove to the Tayo River, the longest river on the Iberian Peninsula, and dumped her body. He then returned to his house, acting as if nothing had happened. Back to the interrogation, Ruben began to crack under the pressure and started to sob. He said he did not mean to kill her. He loved her and that he only wanted to be with her. He said that he had initially gone to the apartment to talk to her, but she rejected him once again and told him to leave. That's when he lost control and hit her with the rod in a fit of rage. He said that he had panicked and that he had tried to get rid of the evidence and the body. He said that he regretted what he had done and that he wished he could take it back. The police asked him what he had done with the body, and he told them about the exact location in the river where he wrapped the body in a blanket, tied it with a rope and a weight, and watched it sink. He said that he had hoped that the body would never be found and that he could forget what he had done. The police, accompanied by Ruben, launched a search operation along the Tato River. After several days of relentless searching, using boats, divers, and drones, they finally discovered Beatrice's body about 1.5 miles downstream from where Ruben had discarded it. The body was in an advanced state of decomposition, but was positively identified as Beatrice through her dental records. Forensic evidence confirmed she had died through severe blunt force trauma to the head, and she had defense wounds on her hands, indicating that she fought back. The police charged Ruben with first-degree murder and concealment of a corpse, and took him to the prison, where he would await trial. The news of Beatrice's death sent shock waves through the community. Her friends, classmates, and colleagues were left devastated, unable to comprehend that she had been murdered by someone they all knew, and even participated in the search for her. A vigil was held in her memory, and social media was flooded with grief and memories of Beatrice. The betrayal by Ruben only amplified their grief. Him and his family received damning messages on social media. He was the most hated man in Portugal. Ruben was charged with murder, desecration of a corpse, and simulation of a crime. He was held in preventive detention, awaiting trial. At some point, he was assaulted by another prisoner and had also attempted to end his life. He was offered psychological counseling, which he refused. While awaiting his trial, he was put on suicide watch. However, on Sunday, June 20th, 2020, sometime between 10 p.m. 11 p.m., he hung himself in his cell with his bedsheet and left a note behind in which he apologized for his actions and expressed his inability to live with the guilt. Beatrice's mom expressed her condolences to Ruben's on social media. She said she had empathy for his family because they too had lost a child. In addition, she wanted to put an end to the hate that was on social media. There was an overwhelming amount of hate against Ruben and celebration around news of his demise that Paula wanted to counteract these hateful reactions with one of peace and love. She wrote, quote, "Ruben is a normal boy, 24 years old, who could well be my son. I must therefore pay my respects to his family." She further said regretted he took his life because it affected her own closure. Quote, "I should have talked to him. It was the least he could have done. I needed answers." The case of Beatrice Labor was officially closed, but the questions lingered. What drove Ruben to commit such a violent act? How was he able to conceal his dark side from everyone who knew him? In the wake of Beatrice's death, her family and friends worked tirelessly to preserve her memory. They organized concerts and readings in her honor and established a scholarship in her name to support students pursuing psychology. They also raised awareness about violence against women and mental health, encouraging others to seek help if they found themselves in similar situations. Beatrice Labor's tragic story reminds us of the importance of controlling our impulses, respecting others' decisions, even when they differ from our own, and not letting dark thoughts and emotions take control. I leave you with a video of Beatrice Labor, as she might have wished to be remembered, playing the piano. May she rest in eternal peace, and may her music continue to inspire and resonate forever. In January 2005, the small town of Crothersville, Indiana, was shaken by a tragedy that would forever alter the community. 10-year-old Katie Coleman went missing after running a quick errand to the local dollar store, just a block and a half from her home. She had made this trip countless times before, and her mother always felt secure knowing that Crothersville was a quiet town with a low crime rate, where neighbors looked out for one another. But on this day, fate had a cruel twist in store, and the people of Crothersville were left devastated by the heartbreaking loss that would forever change their town. Katie Coleman never made it home that afternoon, and despite the best efforts of the community to find her, her body was tragically discovered 5 days later in a creek near Cypress Lake, approximately 19 miles from her home. Her hands were bound behind her back with a slip knot, a knot that tightened with every attempt to escape. Autopsy reports later confirmed that Katie died from drowning, and there were signs that she had been sexually assaulted before being thrown into the creek. Even more chilling was the discovery of DNA evidence that suggested the killer had stood at the edge of the creek, watching Katie struggle for her life before ultimately witnessing her drown. The brutal fate of Katie Coleman left the close-knit community of Crothersville reeling, as they struggled with an overwhelming mix of grief, anger, and disbelief over the horrific crime. When the killer was finally caught, their rage intensified. The community seethed with fury at the identity of the monster who had destroyed a young life and shattered a family. They demanded the harshest punishment possible, knowing full well that it could never undo the unspeakable horrors that had been inflicted upon Katie. Despite the community's quest for justice, they knew that nothing could ever truly make up for the life that had been taken away so brutally. Yet in some small way, Katie finally found her own form of revenge. This is the heartbreaking true crime story of Katie Coleman. Tuesday, January 25, 2005 started out like any other day for 10-year-old Katie Coleman, and she began her day with her usual routine. She enjoyed breakfast with her family before heading off to school, excited to see her friends, and no doubt discussed the much-anticipated pajama party, which was due to take place the following day. The hours passed by rather uneventfully until the bell rang at 2:30 p.m., signaling the end of the school day. Katie got home at around 3 p.m. and spent some time with her mother, who was already preparing dinner for that evening. At some point, Katie's mom mentioned that she needed to get to the shops to buy some toilet paper as the family was running low and needed to replenish. Katie, being someone who always loved to help out, immediately volunteered to go to the shop for her mom, always eager to help and make life easier for those she loved. Katie left her house at around 3:15, striding down the familiar path toward the local dollar store situated just a block and a half away. She had made this journey many times before, and she knew it like the back of her hand. Her mother wasn't too concerned about her walking alone. After all, Crothersville was the epitome of a small-town haven. It was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked at night and where children could roam freely without a care in the world. It was a world that felt almost nostalgic, where the pace of life was slow and people looked out for one another. But little did anyone know that tranquility was about to be shattered in the most horrific way imaginable. Katie's parents traced her steps, and it was confirmed that she did indeed buy the toilet paper at the dollar store and began walking home at 3:40 p.m. Neighbors in the area saw Katie at around 4 p.m. walking along the train tracks on her way to her home. This meant that Katie should have been home shortly after 4. When she didn't make it home, however, her mom wasn't immediately concerned. Katie was known for chatting with friends along the way, and it wouldn't have been strange for her to play for a little while before going back home. When 6 p.m. came around and still no sight of Katie, her mom still wasn't too concerned. One of their family members would often take Katie along to the mall with them whenever they drove past her or saw her walking to the shop. So her mom naturally assumed that this family member probably spotted Katie along the railway tracks and invited her along to the mall. When 7 p.m. rolled around, her family started becoming concerned and tried calling around to see if anyone had seen Katie. When they were unable to get hold of anyone who they thought would have been with Katie, that's when they decided to call the police. The police were initially reluctant to declare Katie a missing person, believing that she was probably at a friend's place or even that she may have run away. Kidnappings were practically unheard of in these parts of town, so police believed that Katie would show up. Her parents and the community as a whole were, however, convinced that foul play was involved. Katie wasn't the type of child to just run away from home, and she wasn't known to stay out this late. The community immediately launched a search party consisting of more than 120 members of the community, and they all began searching for any trace of Katie. After 18 hours of searching and without any significant clues on Katie's whereabouts, the police knew that it was unlikely that she was at a friend's place, and they officially declared Katie a missing person. They allocated all of their resources toward the case, hoping to find someone who would be able to shed some light on the case. And then, 2 days after Katie went missing, their persistence finally paid off, and they got their first big break in the case. A neighbor called the police and told them that she'd seen Katie in a white Ford F-150 pickup truck between 4:30 and 5 o'clock. She didn't recognize the driver of the vehicle, but she was certain that it was Katie in the passenger seat. The driver of the vehicle was described as a white male of slender build between the ages of 18 and 22 years old. A composite image of the suspect was generated, and the public was requested to come forward with any information which may help police. Unfortunately, no solid leads were uncovered. Police also searched the records for all owners of a white Ford F-150 living in the area at the time, and they then cross-referenced that list with a list of all registered sex offenders. They then visited every single one of those people where they were required to provide police with a statement and a satisfactory alibi. But once again, they had no solid leads. On January 30th, 2005, 5 days after Katie Coleman was reported missing, a state trooper decided to search the Cypress Lake area, around 19 miles from Katie's home. The spot was notorious for its nefarious reputation, where shady characters often frequented for illegal drug usage. Almost immediately after arriving at the lake, the state trooper noticed something floating in the water near a culvert. Upon closer inspection, he recognized Katie's blue jacket, and as he got closer, his worst fears were confirmed. It was Katie herself, her lifeless body lying face down in the water, her hands cruelly bound behind her back. The tragic and brutal scene was enough to haunt the officer for years to come. The news of Katie's murder sent shock waves through the community of Crothersville, who was faced with the horrific realization that they had a murderer among them. Police were certain that the killer had to be someone local to the area, as the spot where Katie's body was found was in a remote location that only locals would be familiar with. Police meticulously combed through their suspect pool, interviewing various members of the public and following up on leads, but it seemed they just couldn't get the break they needed. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, on the third day after Katie's body was found, the case was turned on its head when someone unexpectedly stepped forward and confessed to the murder of Katie Coleman. On February 2nd, 2005, Chucky Hickman walked into the Indiana Police Precinct and told investigators that he was responsible for Katie's murder. Chucky was a 20-year-old native of Crothersville. He was seen as a bit of an eccentric figure and was a known methamphetamine addict. He told police that after Katie left the dollar store, she stopped at an apartment building to visit a friend. Chucky said that he was at that same apartment building at the time, also visiting a friend. He said that Katie then came across him and his friend while they were in the process of making methamphetamine, and they were concerned that she would tell on them. They then decided to scare her into keeping quiet, so they tied her up and drove her to the lake. He said that when they got to the lake, Katie slipped and fell into the water, and that's when she drowned. It was a shocking revelation that shook the community of Crothersville, but they were somewhat relieved that the killer was finally found. Unfortunately, though, their relief would be short-lived. A few days after Chucky's confession, the crime lab had finally completed the DNA analysis of the samples taken from Katie's body. Although Katie's body was in the water for 5 days, the ice-cold condition of the water was able to preserve the DNA evidence. Police were able to find traces of semen on Katie's body, meaning that she was sexually assaulted prior to being thrown into the water. When police compared the DNA found on Katie's body to that of a sample taken from Chucky Hickman, they were shocked to discover that it wasn't a match, and it was immediately clear that he wasn't their man. Police then started interviewing everyone connected to Hickman and taking DNA samples from them, as well as from everyone at the apartment complex that day. But frustratingly, this too wasn't a match, and police seemed to be back at square one. Police decided to take a second look at the evidence they collected at Cypress Lake to see if any of them matched the DNA sample found on Katie's body. It was a tedious task with literally hundreds of samples to work through. But finally, the police found a match. At the foot of the lake, just a couple of yards from where Katie's body was found, police recovered a cigarette butt. The DNA on the cigarette butt was an exact match to the DNA found on Katie's body. And police now knew that whoever sexually assaulted Katie was also at the lake that day, meaning that this person was most likely also responsible for her murder. Upon closer inspection of the cigarette butt, police discovered that it was quite an unusual brand. It was a Rogers 100 cigarette brand, which certainly wasn't the most popular cigarette brand around at the time. And police knew that they would be able to narrow down their suspect list if they can identify smokers who used this brand. They went to all stores within a 50-mile radius of Cypress Lake, and they quickly learned that Rogers cigarettes were only sold at 4 locations. Detectives then went to each of those 4 locations and asked that they contact them if anyone buys that particular brand of cigarettes. Less than a week later, the police got the call they were waiting for. A store employee called to tell them that a customer had just purchased a carton of Rogers cigarettes. And what was even more alarming to the police was that this person was driving a white Ford F-150 pickup truck, the very same vehicle that a witness said they spotted Katie in. The store employee was able to provide police with the registration number of the vehicle, and when police ran the plates, they came across the name Anthony Stockelman. He was a 40-year-old factory worker living about 15 miles north of Crothersville. He seemed to live a pretty normal life, being married and having kids. Police had actually questioned Stockelman before, after witnesses placed him in the area where Katie went missing on the very day she disappeared. Witnesses also told police that he drove a white Ford F-150, so naturally police wanted to speak to him. When Stockelman was interviewed, however, he admitted to having seen Katie along the railway tracks that day, but said that he didn't know what had happened to her. The officer who interviewed Anthony said that nothing about him stood out, and the officer didn't think that he made a good suspect. He hadn't been in trouble with the law. He had no history of violence, and he had no affinity towards children. As far as the police were concerned, he was happily married and raising kids of his own. Stockelman even went as far as to take a polygraph test to prove his innocence, but it was revealed that he never completed it. He had worked the graveyard shift the night before the test, so the next morning he kept on falling asleep while he was taking the test. The polygraph concluded that they couldn't definitively determine if Stockelman was truthful or not, and made a note that the test would have to be rescheduled. This, however, never happened. Police knew they needed to speak to Stockelman again, so they went to his house to question him again. He once again denied any involvement in Katie's disappearance and said that he hadn't been at Cypress Lake at any point during the last 10 years, and that he had an alibi for the day Katie disappeared, an alibi his wife confirmed. Despite what Stockelman was telling police, they still took a DNA sample from him and sent it to the labs for testing. A few days later, the results came back and it was an exact match to the DNA found on the cigarette butt, as well as the DNA found on Katie's body. Police arrested Anthony Stockelman and obtained a warrant to search his truck. They took DNA swabs from his door handles and steering wheel, as well as from the numerous cigarette butts found in his truck. They were able to confirm that Katie Coleman was indeed in that truck, and the only other DNA they found was that of Stockelman, meaning that he worked alone. Police also took DNA samples from the rope used to tie up Katie. Although she was in the lake for nearly 5 days, and the water no doubt washed over the rope a couple of times, police still hoped that they would be able to find some DNA. Luckily for the police, due to the icy cold water of the lake, the rope still held some of Stockelman's DNA, which was enough to confirm that he was the one who had tied up Katie. The pieces of the puzzle were all coming together. Not only did they have his DNA on Katie's body, which proved that he raped her, but they also had his DNA on the rope, which confirmed that he was the one who tied her up and most likely threw her in the water. The fact that they also found the cigarette but at the lake, according to police, suggested that Stockelman stood at the side of the lake smoking a cigarette while he watched Katie die. Stockelman refused to cooperate with the police or give his side of the story, but due to the amount of evidence they were able to recover, prosecutors told the court that they had a pretty clear picture of what transpired on the day Katie disappeared. They told the court that on this day, Stockman was packing up his mom's things because she was in the process of moving house. Stockelman's mom lived directly on the route Katie would have taken when she walked to the shop, and police were certain that he spotted Katie walking alone. Police then believed that he lured Katie into his mom's house, as there was no one else at home at the time, and it's there where he assaulted her. Evidence of red fibers was found on Katie's body, which seemed to match the red rug in the main bedroom of the house. The prosecution believes that after he assaulted her, he took her back to his truck and drove out of town towards Cypress Lake. It was also around this time that the witness saw Katie in the white pickup truck. After arriving at the lake, prosecutors believe Anthony Stockelman dragged Katie Coleman out of the truck and forced her into the water. He eventually pleaded guilty to the rape and murder of Katie Coleman. On April 17, 2005, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Shortly after his arrest, Stockelman faced even more retribution from fellow inmates. In a twist of fate, he was placed in the same cell block as Katie's cousin, who was serving time for house burglary. On September 22, 2006, Katie's cousin broke into Stockelman's cell and forcibly tattooed the words, "Katie's Revenge," onto his forehead, leaving a permanent reminder of his horrific crimes and sending a chilling message to anyone who crossed paths with Anthony Stockelman about the atrocities he had committed. This tragic story unfolded in Poland, where, due to the disgraceful actions of adults, an innocent boy lost his life. Mariola, a 38-year-old, attractive, slim, blonde woman, was a teacher at a primary school in Czarna Białostocka. She had an excellent reputation among her colleagues, parents, and students. Mariola was deeply dedicated to her work, teaching students in grades 1 to 3. Ambitious and hardworking, she continuously sought to improve her qualifications, learned foreign languages, and earned the respect of those around her through her commitment to education. Despite her beauty, intelligence, and solid financial status, Mariola was a lonely woman. In 1997, her life took a turn when, during a school sports event, she met George P., a well-known and respected businessman, who was also a husband and father of 3 children. He was the chairman of the Parents' Council, and his 7-year-old son Peter attended the school where Mariola taught. A steamy romance broke out between the two in an instant. Mariola lost herself in this relationship. Absorbed in her work, the teacher finally found her happiness in life, her first true love. George P., like Mariola, got involved in this feeling, forgetting about his family. He devoted every free moment to his mistress, promising undying love and divorce from his wife. But he asked for patience, wanting to make life decisions at the moment when his youngest, beloved son Peter, grew up. Mariola was understanding. She did not insist, believing George's promises. She trusted him implicitly, hoping for stability and a lasting relationship. The lovers hid their passionate affair. Only the woman's mother knew about him, and she urged her to break off the relationship, cursing that the relationship would not bring anything good. Mariola didn't want to hear it, and George kept saying that he loved her. Unfortunately, in a town inhabited by about 10,000 people at the time, it was difficult to hide anything. After a while, people began to gossip, and these rumors quickly reached George's family. Mariella received deaf phone calls and threatening letters. On a daily basis, she had to contend with the sinister gaze of her neighbors. Her good reputation at work also deteriorated. The lover couldn't handle the pressure. After 4 years of romance, he announced to Mariola that he was leaving, as he explained, for the sake of the children. The woman experienced a gigantic shock. She couldn't believe that something that was supposed to last forever just ended like that. She couldn't get over the fact that the relationship she was so heavily involved in suddenly ceased to exist. She fell into a deep depression. In a matter of moments, she went from being an attractive, vibrant woman to a neglected, literal wreck of a man. She tried to take her own life twice, begging George to come back to her. The ex-lover was indifferent to her pleas. At the time, all he cared about was rebuilding his relationship with his family. The resigned woman came to the conclusion that the only reason George left her was because of his son, then 11-year-old Peter. April 25, 2001. A day that was remembered by the people living in Charna Bialogtazka. On that day, Mariola M. came to work in the morning, even though she didn't start her lessons until the afternoon. Earlier, she had come to the GP surgery complaining of feeling unwell. At 9:30 a.m., the teacher approached 2 students, insisting that they go to the classroom where the art classes were being held and tell Peter P. that a nurse was waiting for him at the doctor's office. Unaware of anything, the boy, a 4th grade student, went straight to his office. To his surprise, he did not find a nurse there, but Mariola M. A few minutes later, 2 teachers walking down the hall noticed blood flowing from under the door of the doctor's office. Their screams brought the whole school to its feet. The first to arrive was the PE teacher, who kicked down the locked door. Then Mariola M. ran out of the office. Everyone was confused, so no one stopped her. It took a few seconds for the teachers to notice the gruesome sight. On the floor, in a pool of blood, was Peter. The boy was still alive, but by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Classes were canceled and frightened students and their parents gathered in front of the school. This tragedy shook everyone. No one could believe the fact that the most well-liked and respected teacher had killed a student. About 200 police officers took part in the search for Mariola M. Finally, the woman was detained on the night of April 26th to 27th, 2001. The detainee first hid in the Nazinska forest. Then she reached the convent in Marki near Warsaw. From there, she called her sister, telling her about how she had killed her lover's child with a bookbinding knife. She asked what to do. She considered turning herself into the police as well as committing suicide. She confided that she had received the knife as a gift from George. The emergency services called to the scene led Mariola into custody. The woman pleaded guilty. An autopsy of the minor Peter revealed that he died of bleeding. The woman, acting in a rage, stabbed him several times in the head and neck. The child had no chance of survival. The carotid artery was damaged. During the trial, the defendant claimed that she did not want to kill, but to talk. I acted out of emotions. He made me nervous, she said. The prosecutor's office in Białystok charged the woman with murder with particular cruelty for motives that deserve special condemnation. During her pre-trial detention, the defendant underwent a psychiatric examination, which showed that she was fully sane at the time of committing the murder of the minor Peter P. An innocent boy became an instrument of revenge for the actions of an irresponsible father, husband, and lover. Mariola M. was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Despite her conviction, she still has the potential to rebuild her life. With her intelligence and language skills, she is reportedly working hard in prison to secure an early parole. Her actions shocked everyone. Nobody would have expected that from her, said one of her former students, now an adult. George P., on the other hand, lost everything that was most precious to him. While no one deserves such a punishment, and Mariola M.'s actions are undeniable, it is clear that George paid the ultimate price for his affair. Stay safe. In this case, we will explore 3 interconnected stories. The ripple effects of these tales were so profound, they forever altered the political landscape of China. Imagine this: the body of a heavily pregnant woman, her near fully developed fetus still inside, on display at the infamous Body Worlds exhibit. This exhibit, famous for its use of real bodies for anatomical accuracy and their often suggested poses, ignited a firestorm on social media amongst journalists worldwide. But why such an interest? Because this body bears an uncanny resemblance to an 8-month pregnant woman who vanished amidst an affair with a powerful politician. Then a British businessman suddenly meets his end in a hotel room. His body was found along with scattered pills everywhere. The official cause of death? Alcohol poisoning. Yet his family was informed it was a heart attack, and his body is hastily cremated without their consent or knowledge. Even stranger, he was known not to be a heavy drinker. Finally, a police chief walks into the American embassy. Troubled and fearing for his life, he offers truth and dirt on his boss in exchange for protection. What do these three stories have in common? He was a fearless crime fighter, a ruthless gangbuster, a loyal deputy. He was Wang Lizhi, the police chief of Chongqing, China's largest and most populous city, a city of 30 million. He was the right-hand man of Bo Xilai, the charismatic and ambitious Communist Party leader who had his eyes on the highest echelons of power. Together, they launched a sweeping campaign to purge the city of corruption, crime, and dissent. They sang praises for the glory of the Red Revolution. They won the hearts and minds of millions of Chinese people who yearned for a strong and stable leadership. But behind the scenes, a dark and deadly secret threatened to unravel their partnership and expose their true motives. A secret that Wang Lizhi knew all too well because he was the one that helped to conceal it. February 6, 2012, Wang Lijun, dressed in disguise as an old woman, drove to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu, a city about 300 kilometers from Chongqing. He carried with him a laptop, a mobile phone, and a USB drive that contained incriminating evidence. He requested political asylum and protection from the U.S. government. He stayed inside the consulate for more than 30 hours, during which he spilled the beans on the scandal that rocked the Chinese political establishment. During this time, growing numbers of armed Chinese police surrounded the embassy. Inside the walls, Wang disclosed to U.S. officials the murder of a British businessman, Neil Haywood. Haywood was a well-connected consultant with close ties to Wang's boss, Bo Xilai, and his wife, Gu Kailai. Haywood was more than just a businessman. He was a bridge between the East and the West, linking Western companies wishing to conduct business in China to powerful figures within the Chinese political establishment. Haywood had a disagreement with Gu Kailai over his commission for helping to sell her $2,500,000 overseas mansion. He had demanded more than $1,800,000 for making the sale. In China, there are strict limits on transferring money out of the country, and there is an annual limit on the amount of money that can be transferred. Knowledge of this deal would have raised questions in the media on how a civil servant's family income and supposed role models had amassed such wealth to purchase an overseas property of this magnitude in the first place. It's now reported that Bo Xilai and his wife, Gu Kailai, had amassed a fortune of over $150 million despite reporting a modest family income of just over $18,000 a year. This is why they needed strong allies like Neil Haywood to help launder their money and act as middlemen to their overseas financial dealings. What's ironic is that Bo Xilai, along with his chief of police, Wang Lijun, on the outset ran a strong anti-corruption campaign in their city of Chongqing, reportedly arresting over 5,000 criminals, corrupt businessmen, judges, and even government officials. He confiscated their assets and added them to the government coffers and reportedly spent over $15.8 billion on improving public housing and infrastructure for his city's residents. He also attracted foreign investments by slashing the corporate income tax rate by half, whilst encouraging domestic consumption of Chinese products, a surefire smash hit with the government officials watching him from Beijing. It appears that during this time, Bo and his wife amassed great wealth through personal favors and more. November 13, 2011. Gu Kailai got her personal bodyguard to pick up Neil Haywood from Beijing and bring him to Lucky Holiday Hotel in Chongqing and check into a secluded villa, room 1605. She had told him she wanted to have a meeting with him as she now agrees to his requested commission amount and to discuss bigger matters. They had dinner together and then proceeded to his room to have a drink. Unknown to Haywood, Gu Kailai's bodyguard had obtained the room a day before and had prepared it for what was to come that night. During the drinks, Neil was encouraged to keep drinking as they chatted over whiskey and tea. He was happy to hear Gu Kailai had agreed to all the terms and conditions and more. At some point during the night, Neil got so drunk he threw up and asked for some water. It was at this point that Gu Kailai handed him over a concoction, started convulsing and foaming in the mouth, and Gu Kailai force-fed him even more. Within seconds, he hit the floor, and she watched for minutes until he was no longer moving or making a sound. She checked for a pulse, and when she couldn't find one, she let in her faithful bodyguard who was waiting outside. Together, they moved the body and staged a scene with alcohol bottles and pills all around the floor, making it look like an overdose. They then left the room, leaving a "Do Not Disturb" sign outside. Neil Haywood's body was found the next day by hotel cleaning staff. Why did Gu Kailai want to end the life of her closest business ally? It was reported later at her trial that she was extremely paranoid that people were out to get her, and her decision to end Neil Haywood's life stemmed from a threatening email that he had sent her son where he hinted at exposing their family if he didn't get his fair compensation. Going back to Wang Lijun at the embassy, he said he had a recording of Gu Kailai's confession and that he spoke to her husband Bo about this. However, when Bo heard about this, he slapped him across the face and belittled him on the spot. Wang said he felt betrayed and embarrassed because he had directly involved his staff to falsify and close the investigation at great personal risk. However, what he was truly afraid of was seeing how many of his colleagues were getting arrested and removed. He feared it would soon be his turn as another loose end to tie up. Unfortunately for him, Hillary Clinton denied his request for asylum, allegedly for not wanting to sour any ties between the two nations, and he was handed over to the Chinese authorities. Wang was later tried and sentenced to 15 years in prison, but not before bringing forth a scandal which shocked the nation and brought down Bo Xilai and his wife, Gu Kailai. July 26, 2012, Gu Kailai was arrested and charged with murder. A trial on August 9, 2012 delivered a swift and unanimous outcome. She pleaded guilty, and her trial lasted only 1 day. At first, she was sentenced to death, but later this was reduced to life imprisonment. September 2013, Bo Xilai was convicted of bribery, embezzlement, and abuse of power. He received a life imprisonment sentence and had all his assets seized by the government. During his trial, the prosecutors alleged that he demanded an equivalent of US $3,560,000 in bribes from two businessmen, and one of them testified that he gave Bo's wife, Gu Kailai, this money personally to buy Villa Fontaine St. George's in Nice, France, and had also paid for their son's travel and credit card bills. Bo Xilai maintains his innocence to this day, and his last words after the sentencing were, quote, "I will wait quietly in the prison. My father was also jailed many times. I will follow in his footsteps," hinting at how he will find a way out and be successful like his father, a national hero who was also imprisoned but later had a successful career when he was released from jail. This is the biggest fall from grace of a Chinese politician in recent history, one who is considered a princeling. In other words, the son of one of the 8 immortals or founding fathers of the Chinese Communist Party. These princelings are favored to carry the torch forward and enjoy political powers and favors not easily offered to many others. Now, dear listeners, what has all this got to do with the body in the museum mentioned at the beginning of our episode? Stay with us as we examine the true effects of Bo Xilai's reign. Imagine running into a long-lost friend, one who disappeared years ago without a word. Years later, you find them not in the flesh, but as a lifeless exhibit in a museum. This is the eerie tale of Zhang Weizi, a renowned TV presenter from Dalian, China. She was at the top of her game in 1998 when she just disappeared. No one knew what happened to her, and people eventually stopped talking about her. But in 2004, 6 years later, some people said they had found her. She was one of the human specimens on the display in the Body Worlds exhibition, heavily pregnant with a near full-term baby inside, also on display. How was she identified and how did she get there? Let's take a closer look at her life. Zhang Weiqie was a student at the Beijing Broadcasting Institute, one of the best schools for media and communication in China. By 1998, she had Dalian TV station where she worked as a reporter and presenter. She was a popular and well-respected figure in the industry and had many friends and colleagues who admired her. She was also very beautiful and had great communication and presentation skills. She was famous for hosting a show called Sun Rain, which was a popular program that covered guests singing and dancing. The show can be described as a cross between Dancing with the Stars and The Voice. One day, she got pregnant and she was very happy to announce it to friends and family. However, a few months later, she suddenly disappeared. People speculated she may have committed suicide or had an accident, and this was covered up out of embarrassment. However, time passed with no news or updates. Life went on and her disappearance slowly faded away. A once popular figure, now forgotten by most, that had turned into her show regularly. That was until April 2004, when someone reported that they found a person that bore a striking similarity to her. They claimed to have found her on display in the Body World exhibition, a controversial show which displayed real bodies, perfectly preserved and dissected to show their internal anatomy. Body World exhibition used a technique called full body plastinates, where the skin is removed and various organs are highlighted or illustrated to display their function in explicit detail. These techniques were developed by Gunther von Hagens, who combined anatomical science and polymer chemistry in the late 1970s. People claimed that they recognized Zhang because the specimen resembled her shape perfectly. The outlines of her skull, the size of her feet, and more disturbingly, a near perfectly developed fetus, which coincided with the timing of her pregnancy when she disappeared. Zhang was around 8 months pregnant, and the fetus on display had arms, legs, and the recognizable face of a baby. This led to a firestorm on social media. News outlets and overseas journalists were calling for a DNA test to confirm the origins of the body on display. Unfortunately, though, no DNA test has been done till date, and the exact identity of the specimen has not been disclosed. Body Worlds have said that their bodies are all procured via donation, with permission from the families, and they have purposely altered the faces of these display models so there is no resemblance to an identifiable person. But people also questioned who would agree to have their pregnant daughter or relative, especially with an unborn child, turn into a display model. This was very unlike traditional Asian culture and values. As it turns out, Von Hagen's Dalian Plastination Limited was the company that processes bodies for Body Worlds and was based in Dalian, China. The company was established in 2001 at the same time Bo Xilai was the mayor of Dalian and had direct oversight of all foreign companies requiring licenses and approvals. Reports speculated that Dalian was the ideal hub for transportation and processing of corpses due to the cheap labor and many bodies available. The affair. Before Zhang Weijia disappeared, there were rumors that she had an affair with Bo Xilai, who was the mayor of Dalian at the time. Some people said that Bo helped Zhang get a job as a news anchor at Dalian TV. Bo was a married man with a family, and his wife, Gu Kailai, was not happy with his infidelity. She knew that her husband had many mistresses, but she was furious that Zhang was flaunting her relationship and threatening to go public. When Zhang Weijia got pregnant, she was uncomfortably open about her relationship with Bo, and this made Gu Kailai extremely unhappy, reportedly crying and upset enough to have publicly expressed her desire to make Zhang Weijia disappear. She used her influence to spread negative press about Zhang, causing her to lose her job. It was rumored that she ran a petition campaign in the press against her, eventually causing her to be arrested by security officials. Zhang was taken to Dalian and Chang Hotel and rumored to be subject to brutal interrogation methods and physical abuse. Allegedly, this was the last time anyone saw Zhang Weijia. It's also rumored that Gu Kailai was the de facto general manager of the plastination company in Dalian. And coincidentally, the company was immediately shut down when Bo Xilai and Gu Kailai were arrested. It was not until Bo Xilai's trial that he admitted to his infidelity with multiple women, and Gu Kailai was convicted of murder, that the true extent of their actions began to come to light. It became increasingly likely that Zhang Weijia's disappearance in Dalian in 2001, when the plastination company was present, had been under the influence of Gu Kailai and Bo Xilai. There was a disturbing possibility that Zhang had become an unwilling victim, her body displayed at the Body Worlds exhibit, potentially out of a wife's vengeful hatred. However, it is important to reiterate that, until confirmed by solid evidence, the origin of the pregnant body on display remains a rumor. As this episode concludes, we are left with more questions than answers. The intertwined stories of Zhang Weijia, Neil Haywood, and Wang Lijun weave a chilling tale of power, corruption, and deceit. It serves as a grim reminder of the extreme measures some will take to preserve their power and status, but also highlights the crucial importance of truth and justice. While we may never uncover the full truth behind Zhang Weizhi's disappearance, the ongoing speculative coverage of her case has, ironically, kept both Xilai and Gu Kailai in the public eye, a reality that Gu Kailai had desperately tried to avoid. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.